It's gonna be alright.
All right, everyone. Welcome to the Stoa. There's another session in a series that we're having called the Entity Pill, where we're exploring the phenomenon of disincarnate entities from various perspectives and traditions. And today we're talking about egregores. And we have Mark Stavish with us. And Mark is a leading authority on Western esotericism and spiritual traditions, having authored over 20 books on subjects such as alchemy and the Kabbalah, and is a founder and director of the Institute for Hermetic Studies. So we're going to have an interview with Mark, and if you have any questions, pop them in the chat, and I'll call on you, and you can ask your question to Mark. So that being said, Mark, welcome to the Stoa. And you have to unmute yourself.
There we are. I keep getting muted on Zoom. It's the egregore at work.
And perhaps the first question before we dive into egregores, I was wondering if you can share what your philosophical or spiritual background is that helps you understand this subject.
Well, my biography is pretty well known and written about in different texts. So the short version is my maternal grandmother and her side of the family were involved with German folk magic, known sometimes called powwow, but really Brauche. And her brother, my great uncle, was deeply involved in all of the major esoteric movements of the 20th century, mid 20th century. I mean, at my feet here is a banker's box with correspondence in it, but from him and Harvey Lewis, from Amwork in the 20s. So he was involved with a lot of different things, and for lengthy periods of time. He was not a dilettante by any stretch. And of course, this directed my orientation into these things when the time came. And I eventually became involved in other organizations and groups, some of which you've heard of, some of which existed and are long gone, such as Philosophers of Nature. And then I have a degree in theology, as well as a master's in counseling. I did my thesis on psychosynthesis, which some folks may have heard of. And that's kind of the short version.
Very cool. And I invited you to the Stoa because you wrote this book, Egregores, the Occult Entities that Watch Over Human Destiny. And maybe we can just start broadly for people who are not familiar with the concept or term. What are egregores?
Well, of course, we say the word poorly. It is Greek, and they can go to Google how to pronounce the word to get it properly done. But, it's a potato situation. So an egregore, which we'll call it, is a collective psychic force. Now, the big question is it of that kind of Jungian collective consciousness or unconsciousness that is kind of amorphic? Or is it something broader, wherein it is connected to something of a metaphysical dimension or psychic dimension into the invisible realms? So whenever you go and join an organization, which is well documented, you kind of begin to mirror and imitate and become like the people in that group. And that's why we often say, he or she acts so strangely when she's with her friends or his friends or in that group, because people tend to mirror behaviors in the groups they're in. So we could look at it in a purely psychological function of group values and group dynamic, or we can look at it in a more, we'll say, parapsychological dimension of kind of a collective consciousness forming or taking place, or we can look at it in the, as I said, the metaphysical dimension, where we're talking about disincarnate entities and the whole lot.
And you talk about two main ways how we can create, or how egregores are created intentionally and just kind of they spontaneously arise. Can you speak on those two ways?
I think things happen unintentionally at first. It's always spontaneous. I mean, you have some kind of experience and you go, hey, how can I do that again? I mean, all metaphysics and religion and spirituality is based upon that. Everyone here had a moment in time when they had some great aha moment and they said, wow, how can I do that again? And this creates or drives the formation of groups, whether they be small groups, medium groups, or wholesale international religious movements or philosophical movements or political movements. And so they can happen spontaneously and then they take on a more formal tone. But when you suddenly realize that there's a method here and you might have a clue as to what that method is, then we see an intentional formation. And people say, you know what, I think we're going to start a cult dedicated to blank. Pick a deity, any deity. It can be all deities. We're going to say the God of wisdom. Well, which God of wisdom? Well, pick a time and place. And then you see how these cults, and I use that in the positive term, uh, begin to evolve and grow over time. And evolution means adapting to their circumstances, not having some predetermined goal, but adapting to the circumstances they're in. And we see that a lot of these movements go from uh, small local deities to national deities and international deities. I think the Egyptians are a fantastic example of that, the Egyptian gods. I mean, really think about it. We're all fascinated by them on some level. And at one time, these were just very local regional beings that then became part of the empire. And then the empire became part of someone else's empire, and then they get exported. And here we are, thousands of years later, saying, gee, I wish I had a ticket to the King Tut exhibition. That would be great to go to, or something to that effect. So the power and the magnetizing power, the enchanting power is maybe the good word we're looking for, the attractive power of these deities and their uh, beliefs around them, the myths around them that survives for so many generations, for millennia even, is a testimony within the notion of the egregore to there being something more there than just a nice idea or an artistic expression.
And I'm curious what the scope is of like what gets to deservingly be labeled an egregore. Is it like a religion, a cult, your local bowling league? Like is it any like when some kind of groupthink emerges, then it's an egregore?
Yes. And that's really the easiest way to think of it. Uh, Groupthink. In fact, I have a book I'm staring at the spine of from the early 70s. It was from one of the United States government's publishing entities, and it was on uh, groupthink. It's actually entitled Groupthink, the process and problems, and about failures and how to avoid them. So this notion of groupthink is well known. It's not a new phenomenon, and it's well known to people involved in any kind of organizational structure. The question for us is, when that organizational structure has, and they all have goals, what are those goals and do they kind of align with our own? Are we comfortable with them? So you join your local bowling league and, that's fine. You just go and you go bowling. The influence of that egregore on you over time is not anything terribly significant. Uh, the influence of the egregore of your religion of choice, maybe, of your political movement, most definitely, even of your employer. And we see how then egregores begin to merge and overtake one another. An example would be a friend of mine was at a major meeting for the corporation he works for, and certain points were brought up, and it was said, well, we would hope that this would provide some soul searching. Well, now notice the language is out of religion, soul searching. And his comment was, when did we become a religion? So this movement of one egregore into the other, this consumption of it, if you will, can even take place on a very subtle level. Often it does. That's when it's more organic. Or it can be done with, incredible force and violence too.
So egregores, it seems like they're being created all the time, often unintentionally. I'm curious what groups out there, whether esoteric groups or parapolitical groups, that are consciously creating egregores with the framing of egregores in mind.
Well, all of them are consciously doing it, even if they don't know they're doing it, in that sense of saying, I'm going to create an egregore that has a connection here on terra firma, on Earth, through the invisible realms, that is, has a metaphysical view attached to it and connects to some kind of deity or ideal, archetypal force. And there's a problem too. We think of these archetypal forces as just mental abstractions and not as sentient beings. Okay. So when we look at that, anything involved in a group is doing it to some degree, and it's not necessarily bad. Okay. What we have to really look at is when groups are doing this and seek to then force views on others, uh, often for their own good, as we're told. And that's where politics comes in. And that's where we see the and religion, okay, or when politics takes over religion, when religion ceases to be a egregore or a link, a yoke to the divine, but now a social force or social movement. And that's where we see the degradation of the religions or the degradation of the spiritual tradition in that regard, when the religion ceases to be an effective means of inner experience and suddenly becomes just a mechanism of social influence, and what we see now is social movements. Yeah, that becomes the new theology. So that's where you can see an aspect of the ebb and flow and mutations of egregores. And then where salvation is defined in those terms. Your salvation is defined in terms of your views and actions rather than in terms of your inner awareness or capacity for inner awakening.
One section of the book that I quite liked is the popping oneself or another person out of an egregore. And I think you used the phrase therapeutic blasphemy as like one of the techniques, which I quite liked. Could you speak on the therapeutic blasphemy and the ways that people can escape an egregore?
It's therapeutic blasphemy is where you intentionally go against the rules of the egregore for that purpose. And you see this a lot with folks who they have this kind of, maybe the best word to use here is superstitious. They have a terribly superstitious reaction to certain things. And what I mean by that is there's a unconscious fear. They're fearful. Don't do this. Well, why? Because, you're not supposed to, or bad things will happen. And they're not really certain why. And maybe an example would be, when my grandfather was a child, right? And apparently he had some run-in with he and his friends when they're young working class boys in coal country. They have a run-in with the local priest, and words are exchanged. And there's a realization that these words are exchanged and terrible things didn't happen. God did not strike them dead. They don't suddenly go to hell. All these things don't happen. So you realize that maybe these ideas that are holding you in place from doing whatever you want to do might have had a good intention, but maybe not anymore. So you intentionally blaspheme them in order to break the hold completely. You intentionally do the thing you're told not to do in order to test the limits of it. Again, here, the purpose is for personal freedom or understanding, to be free of the fear, to open up to what's really at work here, or what you're really possible, your potential. It's not just to be blasphemous in some kind of scandalous way. Scandalous blasphemy is just, that's just what we'll say, some kind of egotistical expression at worst. At best, it's a fashion statement. At worst, it's just egotistical.
So if you have questions, put in the chat, or some are populating already. My last question is about entities and or demons, if you will, disincarnate entities. So this series that we're doing at the Stoa right now is called the Entity Pill, and we're exploring kind of this phenomenon from various different traditions and perspectives, like a Christian perspective, Buddhistic, shamanic, um, and it's kind of like what are the ontological status of these things. And so I'm curious, do you make a distinction between egregores and these like disincarnate entities, or what people popularly know as demons?
Well, an egregore is a collective. I like to look at it more as a funnel, if you will. Now, there is a model, a way of looking at it where it's composed of all of these demons, or not demons, all of these entities. And because it's composed of all of them like us, you know, do I really separate myself from my liver? Do I really separate myself from my big toe? I mean, it's me, but it's not me. So there's a organic aspect going on here. I think to keep it very simple, the easiest way to think of it is an organizational structure, and that these various intelligences uh, have different capacity, and they uh, make up the entities that occupy it for whatever it is, just like anything else. Not everybody does the same thing. So you have a big entity at the top. We can call that the god or the archangel or whatever you like. And it has the administrative view, the executive action. But then at the lower end, human beings, we'll call it the angels or the elementals, they don't have the executive action. They have the function. They carry out the directives, the orders. I mean, that's a kind of a crude way of looking at it, but it's kind of how it functions in general.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Because otherwise there's no purpose to it. Remember, it's a hierarchy. Now, what does it feed on? It feeds on devotion. It feeds on energy, the psychic energy. So whatever energetic components are of the direction of that quality, the more and more it generates within its members. So if you're in a sports activity, you're going to have a lot of Mars. If you're in a military activity, theoretically, you're going to have a lot of Mars. So what goes with Mars? Not only incredible enthusiasm and action, but also the potential for anger and extreme violence and all of the energies that it generates. If you're going for something broad-based, something very big and visionary, and we say big business, big philosophy, big religion, big ideals, particularly utopian ones, right? That falls under Jupiter. And what is Jupiter? That broad vision. There's a certain joyfulness and joy of life there, but it can also be very corrupting in the sense that it becomes very selfish and even debauched. As one has all this sudden power, that's where we talk. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, as the saying goes. And that's an interesting saying too, because if that's the case, then the ultimate corrupted thing is God itself, because God is absolute power. So maybe that's where we get into this whole notion of the fall, but that's another idea for another time. So if you want to use planetary energies, if you want to use the tree of life, these are a nice starting point for beginning to understand how these qualities of energies go from very, very abstract to the very concrete. And along with it, because we tend to be very human oriented, along with it, a variety of intelligences. And those intelligences are not just abstract ideas, but have a potency and power themselves. In fact, we would say that the intelligence and the power is the same thing. There's no real differentiation.
So we'll pivot to the Q&A. A lot of good questions.
What
And
do we got?
Sarah, we'll take you in first. You have a good follow-up.
Hi.
Hello.
Thank you for being here. Super interesting so far. My question was very broad. I wanted to know, let me find it here. How did the advent of the internet and then later social media affect the growth and movement of egregores, both in Western culture and in world culture?
Well, I think tremendously. The internet is really just, if you want to use some basic, it's the exteriorization of Yesod in many ways. I mean, it's just the exteriorization of the unconscious. And it allows for people to create, echo chambers and stay in those echo chambers, which is essentially what, when an egregore, any collective activity becomes destructive, it becomes destructive because it becomes excessively limiting. Now, look, we need limits. Probably the greatest egregoric myth right now is that there's no such thing as limits. There are very real limits. And, the age of Aquarius is not about freedom. It's about limits first. It's ruled by Saturn. People keep thinking, no, Saturn first. You got to learn how to manage yourself before you get freedom. And with that, it's very easy to create your own kind of little psychic cabin, which is in many ways not just neurotic, but psychotic. It's neurotic because you don't want to leave it. You don't want to leave your parents' basement or whatever. And it's psychotic because your whole life now suddenly revolves around screen time. The screen becomes the mirror. That's your magic mirror of reflection. And that's the mechanism. That's your whole ritual worship. And I don't mean that as a metaphor either. I mean that quite literally. It is the ideas that you're rotating back and forth inside your head. So instead of doing affirmations where you're reciting something, or a mantra where you're reciting something, or a prayer where you're reciting something, or a ritual act where you're reciting something and visualizing it, which is now all taking place where? Within your own mind. Therefore, it's shaping your mind. Your mind is shaped by that because it can't be any other way, because it's within you. Now, instead of you actively shaping the mind and the contents of your own mind and your experience, you're passively absorbing it. And that passive absorption is a passive shaping. And that's a weakening of the individual. It weakens them tremendously. And my great fear is it's only going to end when the lights go off. And I mean that seriously. When I look at people, that the only thing that's going to bring an end to that connectivity is not willful choice, but the fact that they can't connect, that there's nothing left to connect to for them. And then they're going to have to connect to themselves and to what's around them. Now, that's not something I want to see. I know what that really means in real time. But that's a real possibility. So, if you have any, love for your children or anyone else's, the best thing you can do is encourage them to disconnect from the screen and reconnect to themselves. But they need a method how. And with that, learn how to reconnect with others. Probably the greatest problem with contemporary spirituality, particularly within the neo-pagans, is that they just don't know how to get along with one another. Well, at that point, why even call yourself a community? Because you have a little bit of an egregore, but the egregore there is very negative. It's one defined as being the outsider. Rather than being part of a community of building, it's about being the outsider, being counterculture rather than culture. What are you building? And that's really important to state, because if you don't learn how to get along with one another and build a future, someone else who does is going to get it, and they're going to define it for you. And you'll have no one to blame but yourselves, because you were too lazy and stupid to do otherwise. And I know that sounds harsh, but that's the reality too. That when you need to look at the future, and that's part of an egregore too, contemporary spirituality has tremendous ideas around it that are not future oriented. They're either future negative or future ignoring. But you see very few people in the community who are future positive. Well, that's it. It's done. Your capacity for adepthood just went to near zero. Because to be a real adept, and I've known a few, you've got to solve problems. You don't just throw your hands up in the air and say, oh, it's terrible, it can't be done. Oh, look, someone else did it and they failed. Oh, look, I can't. No, you have to learn to get along well with others and solve problems. But that is also building an egregore, by the way. And then what that means is you have to rechange or shape or get away from the other ones that you may be involved with that are saying no to everything. So I view these activities as both, the notion of the group mind is not a negative thing, but it is true. In Masonry, there's the master of the temple, there's the household of the faithful, and then there's the volume of the sacred law. In Buddhism, there's the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha. In Christianity, you have the body of Christ. Okay. All of these are saying what your grandmother told you, you become like the company you keep. So pick your friends wisely. And that's really important because you will take on the characteristics of the people that you spend the most time with. And even if those friends are virtual or just a screen and a simulacrum of a human being, a virtual reality, so to speak, or even not quite literally. I hope that answered your question.
I feel like you gave me about 15 things to unpack here, so thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Gordon, you had a question.
Yeah, forgive me if I missed this in a couple of minutes when I was out of the room, but I wonder if, as you're considering egregores, do you actually consider them as agentic entities in their own right? Do they have goals and needs, etc., separate from the individuals that comprise them? Do they have their own ends that might in fact be run counter to the ends of the individuals that comprise them?
Well, sure. And that's the perfect example of that is communism.
What would be the locus then, or how does that agency hold together, especially hold together over time and express itself over time? Is there a mechanism that you can discern and identify, again, separate from the individuals?
Really, the problem is the ideals that are being presented, the mechanisms being presented for carrying it out, and then, of course, the results. And I use communism because communism is a very good example on numerous levels. One is it's murdered more people than National Socialism. So that level of sustainability from, we'll say, 1917 onward, and 1990, 91, but then we see still examples in North Korea and probably a few elsewhere. And then we see its subtle morphing in different ways. But the idea of this is all for the good of humanity. And, there were a lot of legitimate points being made. The question is, and the problem being, is that even those legitimate points are made, it doesn't necessarily mean that the methods meant to rectify actual or perceived problems were going to be helpful. As Stalin said, no man, no problem. Now, communism advocated itself as being materialistic and even atheistic. And what's fascinating there is it had a very robust psychic research program and then redefined all psychic research and attempted to do so in terms of biological and physical mechanisms. Not necessarily wrong, I wouldn't say that, but it would limit it right there. It brought it to that limit right there. So you look at the end, how many, we'll use a conservative number, 80 million people dead later. And where was the utopia promised? So that's a nice extreme example because you can all see it. You can all look it up. You can all talk to people who experienced that Soviet period or other things like it. You can look at smaller ones too, which are most likely what you're involved in, and say, you know, this is the stated ideal. Am I getting what I was promised? Or am I getting a good approximation of it? And that's really just fair to do. Because you see, your ideals will be used against you. If I were to read off the platform for National Socialism, I'm sure that everyone here would agree with about half of the points on that platform. At least half. Because, as they say, the devil's in the details. And that's where you need to pay attention. And that's why jingoism and slogans are so important. They're the mantra, they're the magic spell, they're the invocation. Repeat it over and over and over and over again, but don't ask what it means. It's when you start asking, and then the people say, well, you know, they'd want to jettison you from the group because you've asked for the details. And then it gets upset. So these forces do have their own agenda, by the way, and they feed on human emotion and, you know, life. They feed on your life. Some even feed, you know, quite literally on your life force, your blood. So, and there are different ways that offering can be made. This is where we run into so many problems. And I see this with a few years back with some very notable occultists who were publishing blogs. I'm not even really sure what the problem was, but they needed to state something. And it seemed like they were incapable of recognizing a magical operation that wasn't dressed up. Like if it didn't have a formal ritual and a formal method that they could recognize, they couldn't see that this was a magical operation. Now, having been exposed to a lot of very significant folk practices from back in the day, you know, I can tell you, you know, a really good practitioner doesn't need a lot. And they know what they need to get XYZ done, and they do it. And all that is for the most part, is getting your attention. I can capture your attention. I've captured your energy. I've captured your juice. And in fact, if I've captured your energy and juice, I've captured it mostly. And here, we'll just give you some ideas, okay, for discussion, for your mental considerations later. Essentially what I've done is I've put a little wormhole into your solar plexus, into your navel chakra, your fire element, which governs sight, so to speak. And that way I can control that to some greater or lesser degree and keep it from, if you're attempting to, from going anywhere else. We keep you locked in that. And if I have a good fantasy realm, a lot of reflective imagery, a lot of magical imagery, a lot of hypersexualized imagery, you know, then I can hook into your sexual chakra. And that deals with dreams and everything, the unconscious stuff. That's why you see so much is hypersexualized. And simultaneously, it's funny. Not only on one hand, it's hypersexualized, and on the other time, I haven't seen a more frigid and sexually repressed group of people in my life than I have current generation. Because they've been also terrified to talk to one another and communicate with one another, lest they be responsible for someone else's miscommunication or misunderstanding. So you see how all those contradictory forces come to play, and basically you make people nuts. That's an egregore at work. Gonna make you nuts. And that keeps you locked even below the level of the solar plexus. And if you're not there, if you can't even function on a day-to-day basis from your gut like that, you're out of the equation. You're out of the life equation, metaphysically and even physically. Because you're probably not going to reproduce except by accident. And you certainly don't have the juice to make any dynamic decisions on your own because your courage has been stomped on or put out, extinguished. because to move beyond that, to have real courage requires individual action and initiative. And if you're constantly be concerned what others will think of you or that you'll be misunderstood, then there's no courage, there's no individual, your spiritual progress is done. Flatlined. And that's an egregore at work.
Right.
And to go back to your question, Sarah, and mass media has allowed that to happen nearly instantly in about 10 years, 15 years, maybe 10.
Julie, you had a question. Maybe you can't unmute. Yeah, there we go.
Hi, Mark. I think you answered it. My question was about archetypal forces that are sentient beings. So I thought gods, planets, constellations. I think it really could really be that you got into elementals. So it could be, I guess, almost anything. Could you elaborate on sentient?
Just self-aware, self-awareness. And just think of what you do in an ideal situation, in an ideal world. In an ideal world, you go into a position at a company and you do your position very well, your job very well. You are promoted, you find promotion. And in that promotion, you understand not only your previous job very well, but the jobs of other people probably fairly well, and now your own. You've gone from being a private to a wonderful lance corporal. Now you get promoted further on, and oh, maybe not. We're going to skip corporal. We're going to make you a sergeant now. And now you're maybe a supervisor of a bunch of folks, and you know them well, and you know their capacity well, and you know their jobs well. And you also have a sense of connection to those things around you. So in theory, as you go all the way up this chain of command and hierarchy, the president of the company, in theory, with his board of directors or her board of directors, whoever's on it, they really know their jobs. They know everyone else's jobs very well, all the way down, and they know their capacity and limits. So that would be the ideal, the way of thinking about it. Because remember, their limitations in terms of capacity and knowledge are much less than ours. They have fewer limits in that domain. So each person in that business is just each being in that hierarchy, has its own degree of self-awareness. It just, the more self-aware it is, we'll say the deities, in this case, the presidents and the board of directors, they have far more self-awareness or sentience, and with it, inherent power. Knowledge is inherent power on the psychic domain. It's not like in the material world where an idea has the capacity to remain abstract. In that dimension, an idea is a thing. It's an inherent power, capacity. Did that help?
It did. Thank you. It's just when you kind of first start getting into the invisible worlds, it's kind of a shock to really realize that all that is real. So, yeah.
Oh, it's atrocious. And what really makes it terrible is like if you end up reading something like Alice Bailey's Theosophical Flowcharts, the administrative flowcharts of cosmology, that'll just make you crazy, as it should. They give you this very rigid notion. And the thing is, all of this is very dynamic, just like our day-to-day life is very dynamic. And that's the problem. When we talk about it, I'm trying to give you things that we can understand, as above, so below. There's this mirroring action. And that mirroring action really should be taken kind of seriously, because even the archetypes aren't as cookie cutter, comic book, flat two-dimensional as we often encounter them as. That's why there can be so many built-in contradictions within them. or how those contradictions make up the extended family of the archetype, if you want to call it that. And that extended family would then be the broader egregore of the archetype. So if you go into a book and you read, say, Giordano Bruno's descriptions of the powers of Venus, and then you go to Agrippa and you read his descriptions of the powers of Venus, right? You'll notice there's all these wonderful things in there, and there's all these wonderful animals in there, and all these wonderful uh, gems and minerals and plants, all these things. All of these are part of its world. So an egregore then in its way becomes its own world in and of itself. Just as we say there is a tree in each sphere. So each sphere on the tree becomes its own complete dimension or domain. In fact, each tree on the sphere, or each sphere on the tree of life is its own cult or sphere of practice or mechanism for liberation in its own way, as if going through a wormhole, if you will.
Very powerful stuff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Robert, you had a question.
Hi, Mark. I had to miss the first part of your talk, but I loved your book.
Thank you.
So, how can you use your understanding of all these dynamics in a way that helps our growth and evolution?
It's very simple. And that's really the best part of this is that all I want you to do is if you walk away from this talk today, all I want you to do is one thing. I just want you to sit back and relax and look at all your relationships with different groups. And of course, family is part of it, friends, employers, philosophical ideas, political, religious, all of that. And ask yourself, am I getting what I was promised? Is it possible to get what I'm promised? Is it possible? Is this helping me in my freedom? Or is this keeping me more entrenched, and we'll say by that neurotic? Then the big question is how is this, and this is particular with your spiritual practices, your magical or esoteric practices in particular, what will this do for me when I'm dead? Will this help me with my continuity of consciousness? Or will I just fall back to sleep? So look at these relationships from that question, and then, begin to slowly decide which ones you need to strengthen, which ones you need to weaken, and which ones you may need to sever. And sever doesn't have to be terrible, by the way. You can just let them die a natural death. There are some people who, for whatever reason, you really shouldn't be talking to. But for whatever reason in the relationship, you pick up the phone when they call. Don't. Just let it go. Let it go. Begin to let those things go. Don't try to talk to them. Don't try to explain to them. Don't try to get them to be a different person. Don't waste your time like that. Just let it go. And then look at the organizations. You may have joined a group at one point, and it was very exciting and interesting. It was fascinating for you and helped you a lot. And now, for whatever reason, new people have moved in, or it's not doing the same. Well, you don't have to break completely. You just have to adjust your relationship. I have a very good friend who's involved with a magical group in Northern California, and they keep insisting to him that he go through the grades. And he goes, I'm not going to go through the grades. I come up, I perform the ritual for you like you ask. I enjoy the social time, and I do the ritual better than anyone. And I know this stuff anyhow. I'm not going to waste my time going through grade tests that I don't need to take just so you can put a check in a box, because I don't care about it. What I like is I like coming here, being with you once or twice a month, helping out and going home. Now you see that's a healthy relationship for him. You can maybe look at it the same way. Too often we look at things as all or nothing. And life isn't that way. So just ask yourselves those questions. I know why I'm here. Am I getting what I expected? Am I getting what I was told? And is it possible? Because maybe it's not possible. You know, utopian ideals are the worst. Those are the utopian ideals are the thing that really drive us into hell, and that's not an exaggeration. So, and why? Because that's an all or nothing. Yeah. Will this help me when I'm dead? No. Okay. See you later. And then you ask yourself, what will help me when I'm dead? And then you go for those practices. That's when you read Between the Gates. Yeah. I hope that helped, Robert.
Yes, thank you.
Who else? Who do we got?
Sky, I'm gonna take you in.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. I feel like I'm getting deprogrammed real time. It's like a little disconcerting and great and wonderful. This is really, yeah, I got a lot going on actually. But the question that I put into the chat was about being a parent. And I have a 14-year-old daughter, and yeah, like my heart is racing. Yeah, I mean, we kind of, yeah. So my original question was like how to protect the kids, or how to, like, even on the drive to school this morning, I told her I was coming to this event about egregores, and I showed her the cover of your book, and she's fascinated, you know, and we talked about it a little, and I couldn't really explain it. Now I've got the group think lens, and this has helped me a lot. But yeah, it's like I really want to educate her, like teach her and set her up for success, and like make sure she's safe psychically and all the things. It's like the job of a parent now. It's like the physical dangers aren't as intense, but for me anyway, in our situation, but the psychological dangers or the social media you mentioned. Yeah, I mean, I really got activated when you were talking about the mirror and the screens, and so anyway, but one of our friends here put, sort of answered the question in a way by saying, maybe your job isn't to protect her, but like maybe she gets drawn in and then figures out how to get out, it's like, so I guess that's it. It's like what to do with the kids, and like, do you have any advice there? I guess that would be the shorthand.
Well, the first piece of advice is ignore that advice you got about drawing in and then getting out, because that didn't work too well for a whole bunch of situations for people that I can think of. Hence the phrase drinking the Kool-Aid. Yeah, they didn't get out. This is serious. And I want to put a big heavy boot on that idea. This is not safe, okay? The world is not a safe place. And that's the reality of it. And in ancient temples, one of the first things you'd encounter was weapons at the gate to let you know it is a struggle to achieve this realization, and that life is war. Now, we may not like that. We don't want to believe that. We want to think everything's nice and everybody's like us. But I've dealt with every class of person there is, from the lowest end to the highest end. And I can tell you, there are people out there who do not like you, do not care about you, and will take advantage of you any opportunity they get. And you will thank God there are prisons. Okay? You need to understand that. The tree of life isn't all the nice, bright stuff. There's another side that they call the qliphoth, or the hells. And that's a reality too. And there are people in this world where their orientation as mind is more towards those dimensions. And that is not an innocent misunderstanding. That isn't an innocent ignorance. That's intentional. Now, you have to protect yourself against them. And that's for real. So, how do you do that? Well, for your daughter, one of the things you might want to explain to her is that, and this is for all of you really, I mean, a lot of egregores, particularly like the magical ones, are kind of like permanently being in middle school. You know, it's like permanent middle school, right? So you have to look at her and say, it's good to have friends, but we have to have ourselves. We have to be a strong individual to ourselves if we want to be a good friend to someone else. And as we grow, it's good to learn how to deal with people and help them. Yet other people's problems are not ours. We can't solve them for them. We can only help them as best we can, but they still have to do it themselves. Yeah. I don't want you to be drinking, high fructose corn syrup 3 times a day, but I can't stop you if you're sneaking it. So I can't protect you from the effects of your actions. I can't protect you from the effects of your thoughts. Only you can. Our thoughts give rise to our feelings to our actions. And it happens like that. The reverse is true with what we expose ourselves to. That visual stimulation, that auditory stimulation gives rise to stimulation, thought, feeling, just like that. You jump out of your chair, when the jump scare comes on the horror movie. So you have to let her know that within this world she will live and move and have her being in, there are some very, very nice people. There's some very, very terrible people. And there's a whole bunch on a spectrum of gray in between. And she has to learn to notice for herself the situation she is in. And the best thing is to pay attention to her gut. Fear is her friend. You don't let it rule you, but you don't ignore it. Fear lets you know that something's not right here and I need to pay attention. If you then develop the capacity to pay attention, if you develop the capacity to not be ruled by emotions, which is hard at 14, 15, 16, even into the mid-20s. It's hard. If you develop that capacity at self-reflection and pausing, then you're able to overcome your fears and overcome your anxieties and not be neurotic and all of that. But if I had to say one skill above all that had to be developed is probably concentration. If you can learn how to concentrate, everything else is easy. Everything else comes after that. But that's very difficult if you're constantly on the screen and constantly being stimulated externally. So in terms of groups, the best advice I give all of you, and I encourage you to do this so that you can experience the blowback immediately and quickly, so you can know what you're really involved with, is to never be in a group where you can't ask a question. If you can't ask a question, it's time to reconsider your membership or to reconsider your perspective on what's happening in the world around you. Because that inability to ask the question is the control mechanism. That's what stops the thinking process. Just ask why, how, when, what for. Now, you may agree with the answer, you may not agree with the answer, but you should still be able to ask the question. And you should get a reasonable answer. So encourage her to ask questions and to think about the answers and then to ask another question and to be an annoying 6-year-old. Go to the 3rd or 4th question. That's when you really find out what's going on. That's when most people lose their patience, because usually they're repeating something rote. It's just a mantra that they're repeating, you know. It's an affirmation of belief, a statement of faith, not a well thought out idea. So by the third question, they usually start to get irritated.
Any follow-up, share or questions, Skylar?
No, I love your response. I mean, I find myself wondering if you have children.
Yeah, I got two of
I
them.
don't mean that impertinent. It's not an impertinent, it's my question. I'm
I
asking.
got two of them.
Amazing. Yeah, because I'm just like, I'm tracking and I'm thinking, I actually think I'm doing a really good job, I gotta say. The nature of the conversations we have and teaching her to like really like the fear piece. It's just like it's so nuanced, you know, and it has to be like, you know, yeah, it's so nuanced. It's so beautiful, actually, you know, to be able to engage with your children on these topics. So, yeah, I took in what you were saying very deeply. I appreciate it.
Well, our baseline now is if you can get a child to 18 without them having a criminal offense or a particular
Honestly,
felony,
I know.
you've done a good job as a parent
I
now.
really am like, she's 14. We're almost there.
Almost there. 4 more years, no felonies, no misdemeanors, everything will be good.
Thank you, Skylar. Mark, do you have a hard stop like now at the top of the hour? Could you
No.
go 30 more minutes?
Yeah, we're good.
Cool. Phil, you had a question.
Thanks for the ability to ask a question here. As you mentioned about, you know, if you can't ask a question, you should rethink. I wrote down a few questions, but mostly I was interested in your perspective on agency and like a degree of agency, and whether that's more of a sort of egoic sense, and that the ability to, you were just talking about a sort of metacognitive ability to create distance from thoughts and emotions, to be less reactive and to be more of a proactive sort of deliberative self. But I'm curious about the degree of agency, even in that sort of metacognitive orientating mode. So I guess a simple way to put it is, what is your perspective on sort of freedom and degrees of freedom and agency that a person could develop?
Well, you know, you have to be realistic here. Okay, you have 24 hours in a day. Theoretically, you sleep for 8 of those hours, so I would encourage you to read Between the Gates so that you can do some dream work that's worthwhile to you, particularly for when you're dead. And then you have 16 hours where you're theoretically awake, of which you're going to be working for, we'll say 8 plus another 2 for preparation and travel. That's 10 hours a day, and that's 18. You still have to maybe eat, cook, do some things. Let's say that's 20 hours a day. So on a really good day, theoretically, you have 4 hours of which you can have some real genuine freedom over, control over. Your capacity as individuals is limited because, well, for a lot of reasons, but the purpose of esoteric practice is to overcome those limits, and that's very important. How do you overcome them? The purpose of groups is to overcome the limit of the individual, because that which we cannot do individually, we can do together. So that's an important part. So you have to pick your friends in the groups wisely. So your degree of agency is really based upon that thin edge of the wedge, which you can control, which you get under the door, and use during those 4 hours that you have some choices in, and then expand those choices into the rest of your time. So in the beginning, we all have very little agency, very little freedom. Freedom is what we build for ourselves. And again, I don't mean that as some kind of poetic statement. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, and I'm curious, maybe it's a personal question, but your own sense of within that 4 hours, or the other day I looked up how much time people spend in a metacognitive state on average, and it said 5% of their day on average. But like even with that, it seems like I'm curious where you land on a sort of deterministic, even within that sort of choice making and a higher degree of agency in those 4 hours
Look,
we're talking about.
just use your head here.
Okay.
Stop with the big words and overthinking it.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, just stop it and look at what really goes on in life. We talk about karma. Karma is cause and effect. A good way to think of karma is habits. We build habits. Okay, there's nothing mysterious about it. There's nothing mysterious about karma except in the metaphysical sense of when will it completely bring itself to fruition or ripening. And even that's not a big concern because you've got the same question about a lot of things. It's no different than many things in your life. You have a high degree of choice in what you do because you're thinking about it. If someone is not thinking, their degree of choices is incredibly limited because it's based on emotional stimuli and response. That's why most of the media management that you get is geared towards managing your emotions to determine the response of the stimuli. So there are people out there who have almost no agency. It's just the way it is. You don't want to be one of them. And you don't want to be around them when things go to crap either. So you need to look at what are your choices, what are the outcomes of those choices, and that gives you more freedom. Freedom and consciousness, freedom and will or choice in action towards a predetermined goal and its realization. Adepthood, enlightenment, that's all the same thing.
All right. Thanks, Phil. Let's do it. Go with John Ellis, then John Pedillo.
Yeah, hi, Mark. You've answered a little bit of this in the previous answer, so maybe it's good just for a summary. But what I was asking was, can you give some advice on going within to look through our own consciousness to find evidence of connection to egregores that perhaps we didn't even know we were connected to? And then if we find something that's maybe not obvious, maybe it's not a person, maybe it's not a group or a church, but maybe it's an idea or a way of thinking that we're latched into, what could we do to start severing that tie if we make that decision?
Well, I think the basic one there is just, kind of what we call a standard mindful meditation of our thoughts and ideas. I hate that phrase, but we'll just use that. When a thought arises, you say, where does this come from? You just observe it and you look at the thoughts and you look at and is there a strong emotional content to things? That's the one you want to look at. What are the things I feel strongly emotionally connected to? Because that's really the defining factor here. It's the emotional connection, and is it strong? And then, okay, maybe there's a weak emotional connection to something that may not be necessarily in your best interest, but then it's the emotional connection that we're looking at, not the ideas itself. And then you have to ask yourself, why? Why am I connected to this idea? Why do I feel that my mind keep going back to this? And you have to just pay attention to it. And maybe for some just peculiar, innocent reasons. Things you're just exposed to as a kid, things you're exposed to as an adult. You just don't not aware of it. Just, got itself in there. And then just when the impulses or ideas arise, is notice them and just step away from them, that you don't have to follow them. That's the thing, learning how to allow the emotions to come and go and not have to follow it. And that's, you know, particularly important when we're used to dealing with strong emotions that lead us down destructive courses of action. You know, just okay, comes and goes. Why? Well, I want to go drinking. I want to go hanging out. I want to go doing stuff with my friends, even though it's going to be destructive because I'm bored. Why are you bored? Because I don't have good control over my own mind and I need to do better things with my time. Or I don't like what I'm feeling now, so I want to feel something different. So the easiest way to do that is chemical stimulation or video stimulation or some other stimulation. You'll notice all these things tend to pull us outside of ourselves rather than allowing us to go within. So what you do is you turn the tables on it. You go within it. You take the impulse because it's coming from in you anyhow, and instead of allowing it to direct you outward towards whatever is, you turn inward on it. I hope that helped.
Definitely. Thank you.
I think we have time for one more.
All right, John, close us off.
Already. Hey Mark, as I was listening to Skylar talk, I went ahead and checked out the cover of your book, and then I got particularly interested in the title of it. It's saying that the occult entities that watch over human destiny. A couple questions came to mind throughout this whole talk, and I guess want to start off with this and with do you have a sense of what the human destiny is?
That title was a working title. And when you write a book, you have to come up with a working title. It helps you stay focused. And we were never able to come up with a better title after that. So we stayed with it. So when we say destiny, destiny does not mean a predetermined outcome. You know, people use the word evolution poorly. Spiritual evolution, they act like there's a goal. When evolution is adaptation of an individual organism to its environment. Now, if enough of those individual organisms survive, they might form a new collective organism, but you know, that needs to happen. So it's not as if we're looking at Desjardins, everyone's heading towards Omega or something like that, or collective enlightenment or anything of that. And in fact, these occult entities, you affiliate with them or not to some greater or lesser degrees, and they in turn affect your life for better or worse. Just going to be a matter of how you manage that time here on terra firma, and then how you manage your time on the other side. So you recognize that these entities are kind of like, and again, this is a bad example, but they're kind of like psychic vacuum cleaners. Scouring the surface of the earth for whatever psychic energies they can to feast upon. Okay. You know, we can look at it that way, very Lovecraftian. And there's some like that. There really are. But there's also other ones which are very helpful and beneficial to us. And some are neutral. We have to keep that in mind too. Not everything is black or white. Right? There's some of our group relationships are kind of weak. It's a weak force. It's a kind of neutral. I hope that did that answer your question.
Okay. I have a follow-up on that.
Sure.
So it sounds like there's something about an adaptive function to an environment that is an important kind of undercurrent in what you just shared. And I'm curious about like what your thoughts are of of spiritual attractors from other traditions and whatnot. Because I see that many of the things that you've shared throughout the call is the kind of pulse of going within. Is there anything like, what are your thoughts about like the traditions that aim for some sort of enlightenment or awakening, and how does that relate to this kind of more of an adaptive kind of working with one's environment and learning from that through, I guess, iterative going with innings of one's life?
Well, even if you're going for enlightenment, you still have to go within. You find it within
Mhm.
yourself. It's not an
Mhm.
external phenomenon. It's not an external event. You know, that adaptation takes place too. And hence the five in Vajrayana, the five qualities of the enlightened mind, the Buddha are, you know, one is, you know, spontaneous action, meaning uninhibited, unpre-programmed response to events as they are occurring as needed. So that capacity is part of this stuff of being deprogrammed or unprogrammed. You know, to be filled with light is to not have a program. To be able to perceive reality as it is. You know, so even within those groups, you know, a lot of these groups have really powerful egregores. You see that in the West with a lot of these, you know, converts, because once you leave your tradition, once you leave your culture and adapt another one, you have to be all in. Otherwise, there's no reason to leave. That's the great joke. My son was horrified when I was joking with this Orthodox Jewish woman that we're getting something from her stand, her food stand, and I said, oh, you know, nothing about Judaism is. She goes, what? I said, you can't convert. And she goes, what do you mean? And I said, well, you know, because either you're going to keep too kosher for some people or not kosher enough. She laughs because she gets it. My son's horrified because he's taught everything is some kind of slur. She's laughing and she goes, that's right. You're either not. That's one of the subtle issues within the culture. And I grew up around a very heavily Jewish community. You know, so the question is, do you keep kosher enough? Are you, and you know, or not enough? That then defines who you are in that community to some degree. So these egregores can get very subtle and very strong, very powerful. People are afraid to talk about it and question it too. You know, like my son, he's been told to be afraid to question everything, courtesy of the public school system and political correctness. So, you know, the answer is predetermined and given to you, which means that egregore is strong. The same happens too when you convert to Buddhism in the West. They turn everything into Dharma Disneyland at these retreat centers. Very expensive Dharma Disneylands. Everybody wants their Tibetan name. They want a new ego identity to hold on to, a new egregore to affiliate with. I need to have my my Nagpa robes and my little silver trinkets on my malas that show I finished my Nundro. Everyone needs to know I finished my Nundro. Twice. And I got the biceps to show for it from doing all those push-ups. I mean prostrations. So you look at those systems and you have to then recognize that they are, in their own way, egregores that may or may not have a purpose that's beneficial to you. Or they may have a very good beneficial in one environment, but depending on how they're led or used, may not have a very good benefit in another. For example, I appreciate that all the food she makes is kosher because it's healthier. But I'm not going off to shul. So I get to benefit in my own way, and we get to have a good relationship. And same thing with some of the Buddhist centers. There's some very good things you can get from them, but you have to pick wisely because they're very concerned about preserving Tibetan culture, and that is not the same as Buddhism. And some of them will be adamant. They'll tell you it's very much that. That's what their main concern is. Okay, well, good. But now I've joined a political movement. I've joined a political cultural movement that now wants my time and money and resources. How is that helping me? And then you can go down the laundry list of anything you're in. That same applies to anything. Okay. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
One more. Let's do one more.
One more. Zinni, who had a question? Apostle, you had a question. If you're here, yeah.
Hey, so you talked very much about how to like disconnect from unharmful and just think about how egregores affect us. But what about transforming egregores? For example, if you're in a leadership position in an organization or some other situation, like you're influencing some organization, how would you go about transforming egregores?
A part of me is going to say, if you got to ask the question, you don't know how to do it. You don't have the ability to do it. That's an honest response. Okay.
I have I
to
personally have some idea, but I'm curious about your.
That's what I mean. You have some idea, and it's an idea. It's kind of like I have an idea as to how to fix my plumbing. And, maybe it's better I call a plumber. Now, to answer your question more completely, because you may have some capacity, is you then have to look at whatever that organization happens to be. And in that leadership position, are you capable of changing the leadership? Because a lot of this is going to move from the top down. It's going to move through leadership. So the additional folks in that leadership position are the key players in supporting or not supporting those changes. Sometimes that requires a decapitation of the leadership. And when you get to that point where you need to completely replace leaders, and I've been in those situations with entities, organizations, man, is it a mess. It is nasty. So if you can get the leadership around you and to begin to slowly take on the idea of maybe taking a new direction, that is letting go of certain things that may be happening or changing others, then you have to begin on the slow end, on the quiet end. Here's the reality. People have enough trouble getting out of bed in the morning and eating healthy and doing 15 minutes of meditation to discipline themselves. The habit patterns are deeply built in. Now, when you take on the habit patterns or take on the sins or karma of a group of people, now that whole group of people is going to consciously or unconsciously fight you. The egregore wants to survive. That's important. As it wants to survive. So what I would suggest you do is just send me an email, or maybe we can discuss it if possible. And particularly if it's an esoteric group you're talking about, because that can get very nasty. And you have to slowly turn the battleship if possible. But it all depends on getting the leadership involved. And then you have to have them doing the rituals and the meditations and the invocations that will attune you as the leader and them as the group around you to that new ideal and drip that or inculcate that into the existing structure, just as you would pour seasoning into a stew or soup that's on the kettle, on the stove. You would pour it in gently and stir it in, not just dump it and walk away, or hope that you can add it after. Well, like we say, sometimes the cake is baked and you can't add it afterwards. That's why things fall apart too. Saturn comes along and down it goes.
Okay, that's a much deeper answer than I expected. Thank you. It was really interesting to hear it.
All right.
Oh, maybe one more. We got a little bit of time.
Who has a question? I think we only have one more question. Guy. You have still have your question?
Thanks, Peter, but I think it's already been answered about the similarity between archetypes and egregores.
I'll actually ask a question. Sky mentioned this in the chat. She said, she asked, what was what's currently the most dangerous egregore in your opinion?
Well, I've said many times, it's political correctness, because it forces people to have a view that's unquestionable. And it's infiltrated and seeped its way into so many things, particularly metaphysical and occult movements. They've become political parties. It substitutes genuine inner reflection for a doctrine. It substitutes genuine interaction and union for a political social philosophy that doesn't allow itself to be questioned and has no sense of humor either. As you can see, what's happened with so much with comedy. You know, people become so sensitive to everything that they respond. They don't respond, they react. They just react. Well, that's it. Reaction is habit. Reaction is ignorance. Reaction is death. So, and it's incredibly materialistic too. Incredibly materialistic in its own ways. I mean, there's others that come and go. And this happens to be the current fabrication, the current one. In the end of the day, regardless of where you are, what you're at, you have to ask questions and be a question mark. We used to have a phrase, be a walking question mark. Feel free to. There's no such thing as a stupid question. There really isn't. So ask any question, and if you find you can't, then you know you need to reevaluate the relationship maybe.
At the Stoa, we have something called a living question, a question we live with without forcing an answer. And I'm curious, are you leaving with any living question today?
No, just find practices that are good for you while you're alive and will help you when you're dead. A lot of these metaphysical and occult systems don't do that for you. They don't even bring up the question. I mean, there's vague talk about afterlife, but there's no real discussion or methodology involved in it. You need to develop that. You need to develop concentration, stability of awareness and consciousness. That will give you freedom and independence, and that will give you awakening and enlightenment. And it's going to be a painful, difficult path. And your only other choice is, well, ignorance. And that will not be an option after a point. So just embrace it, and it makes it a lot easier. Because the pain is relative, really. It's about how we relate to experiences more than a real, genuine, objective kind of pain. And difficult, again, difficulty is relative. It's relative to each individual's encounter with the experiences of life and within themselves. So at this point, then you find you can be helpful to yourself and you can be helpful to others without being, I don't know, demanding or something. I do hope that helped. I do have to go now. I have another call that I have to prepare for. You've given me 3 minutes to do it.
Thank you for staying on later, Mark. And I'll make some closing announcements in a moment, but thanks so much for coming to Stoa today. It was great to have you. A lot of gems sprinkled throughout. And we're meeting as a group this Saturday to have a collective inquiry about the 3 past sessions that we had. So feel free to attend that. And yeah, everyone, thanks so much for coming to Stoa today.